Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, where I am privileged to be joined today by screenwriter, author, Dr. Simon Stephenson. How are you, mate?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So that's making me very happy.
And as we were saying, I was telling you off camera, we're very excited for you to be here as well, because we have a massive amount of fans of your work at Forbidden Planet. And we're here specifically to talk about your novel that's just coming out in paperback. It came out in hardcover last year, Set My Heart to 5, which everybody watching this can order from the link attached to this video. So Simon, could you just talk a bit first about your journey to becoming an author, which I think is such a fascinating story?
Yeah, so it's a really long story. So I'll give you the sort of edited highlights. And when I work mainly as a screenwriter now, and when you go to the general meetings and they ask for this kind of question of what's your background, and I always have to tell them, look, just because my life hasn't had any structure whatsoever, please don't think that my writing doesn't have structure. So I trained as a doctor. I was always loved writing though, and I actually when I was going to university, I didn't know whether I was going to do medicine or English was actually my choice. And the first series of ER started just exactly at the wrong moment. Yeah. And I thought, I'll do that. And of course, the irony of ending up here writing screenplays for a living, it turns out that I wasn't drawn to the hospitals, I was drawn to the storytelling. Yeah. But I enjoyed working as a doctor. I went back and forth between doctoring and writing. I would, work for a bit and raise some money to, take some time out to write my great literary short stories, which no one was interested in reading, and then I would go trudge back to medicine, and back and forth. About 7 or 8 years ago now, I was working as a children's doctor in East London, and I wrote a screenplay about a depressed children's doctor who hated his job and desperately needed a change. I don't know where I got the idea from. It just popped into my head like creative magic. Weirdly, that opened up some doors out here in Los Angeles, and I ended up kind of getting a gig to write a pilot for a sitcom. And I moved out here. I'd met someone, so I stayed here. So I spent kind of the past probably 6 or 7 years mainly as a full-time screenwriter. I'd written a memoir 10 years ago, so I always wanted to write another book, and then a couple of years ago I finally had my idea for my novel and wrote it, and so here we are.
Yeah, amazing. So what can you tell us about Set My Heart to 5?
Yeah, absolutely. So Set My Heart to 5 is it's set in 2054. I like to tell people it's not a dystopia. I think we've all had enough of dystopias,
given the fact that we're living in one
right now. Exactly. So I'm describing this as a mystopia, and that's a world where things have gone wrong in just kind of an all too human way. So in this 2054, Elon Musk has incinerated the moon, which at the time I thought that was a hilarious, but actually now I think that probably is coming.
He probably is what he's going to do. Yeah. Exactly, I mean, amazing that you would cast Elon Musk as some kind of villain figure. I don't know where you possibly get that idea from.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, he's blown up the moon. Humans have locked themselves out of the internet because I don't know if this has happened to you, but I spend hours each week when you forget your password for your email, so then it sends it to your old email, but then to get into your old email you have to tell them the name of your first pet and your favorite teacher, and you always have that moment where you're, well, which one actually was my favorite teacher, or which of those pets technically came first, because they were both there when I was born. And so on a critical day in 2038, what happens is enough humans forget the names of their first teacher and their favorite pet, and the other end, and that leads to this panicked wave of forgetting across the country, where suddenly everyone's locked out of their email, and it's just sort of escalates to the point where we're locked out of the internet, and that's planes start falling from the sky, and all that culture that's stored digitally is gone. So that's something that's happened. So that makes 2054 sort of weird mix of the old and the new. So there's no planes anymore because they're all still suing each other over who is responsible. But you can go on the train. And I guess that the modern thing is that by 2054 we have androids, and androids are I don't need to tell Forbidden Planet viewers this, but normally at this point I explain that an android is robot who looks human. The trick with the androids in Set My Heart to 5 is that they're engineered using CRISPR, which again, you guys will know all about that, which is this incredible technology where we can now just edit the human genome at will, and nobody's talking about that for some reason. So the idea is that to make an android, all you'll have to do, we sequenced the human genome 20 years ago. I mean, I didn't, but as a race we did, species we did. All you would have to do is then pick out the bit that codes for consciousness and swap that in with the source code for, say, Windows 97. And then you would have a programmable human. So by 2054, we've worked out how to do this. And of course, the thing about us being humans is we're not going to treat androids, particularly well. So we're going to make them do all the jobs that we really don't like doing. So the narrator of the book, Jared, is a dentist. Because and androids will be great dentists because they don't have any empathy, you see. So they're going to get that tooth out just no matter how much you complain. It's coming out there and then. But as humans, of course, we have this challenge that androids are going to be better than us at just about everything because they're computers. They're going to be better at so many things. But the one advantage we have is our feelings. So we're then going to be very protective of our feelings, and androids aren't going to be allowed to have feelings. They're going to be coded not to have feelings. And if any android does have feelings, then they're going to be in trouble, and they're going to be, either erased or more likely incinerated. So Set My Heart to 5 is the story of Jared, who's a dental android who one day begins to suspect he might have feelings, and this sort of propels him. He shares a practice with a human doctor because doctors will still be humans in 2054, and the doctor says, well, I think you're depressed, and the android says, I can't be, I'm an android, that's ridiculous. So they agree an experiment, because androids love experiments because it's science. And the experiment is Jared the android is going to go and watch a movie, and this will test whether or not he can feel. And so he goes to the movie, and he comes back and sees the doctor, and the doctor says, how was it? And he says, well, it was fine, but nothing happened. I must have had allergies because about 27 milliliters of tears emerged from my eyes at the end of the movie, but it was just my allergies. And of course the doctor says, no, that was feelings, you were feeling something. And so this sort of sets Jared off on an adventure to really kind of learn about his feelings. One of the fun things of the book is because of all that culture that we lost that was stored digitally, by 2054 there's really going to be two kinds of movies. There's going to be the movies that they make at that point, which are just going to be 12-hour long Marvel extravaganzas with killer robots, basically. And as an android himself, Jared's not going to watch that. So, but then there's still going to be sort of art house cinemas showing old movies. But the joke there is that the only thing that's going to have survived is the movies which were physically stored on film. And particularly amongst those, it's going to be the movies they had a lot of copies of. So that's basically the blockbusters of the 80s and 90s. So the idea kind of is if you're a cinephile nowadays, what you tend to do is, you go and see an obscure 7-hour-long French black and white documentary, and you come back and tell your friends, I saw this brilliant film. You wouldn't like it because it's for cinephiles like me, but it was really workable. And in the future, people are going to be doing that same thing, but with Titanic and Forrest Gump and things like that. So Jared kind of falls in love with those movies, and eventually he sees Blade Runner, which I'm not giving too much away, it's still fairly early in the book. And of course, as a feeling android, seeing Blade Runner, that's a big thing, right? He feels seen and he feels represented, because of course that's a movie that's very much about feeling androids. And so basically Blade Runner gives Jared this idea, because as an android he is immensely logical, but kind of too logical, because he kind of watches the movie and he thinks, well, this is the way. If I can, well, first of all, he just says to the doctor, look, we should just get all humans to see this, because if they saw this movie, they would understand that androids could have feelings and they would be nice to us. And the doctor says, well, the thing is, everyone saw this and it didn't change anything. And he says, well, why is that? And the doctor says, well, I guess, this movie was made before we had androids. So people actually watch this movie and say, wow, aren't humans that made people think that androids can have feelings so wonderful? Humans are great. And so Jared says, well, you're saying if I as an android wrote a movie like this, people would feel the same way about androids. So Jared sets off to Los Angeles to write a movie that's going to save him and his kind. And of course, when he gets to Los Angeles, it goes about as well as it does for the rest of us who come out here with big dreams.
What a truly fascinating concept, mate. What was your, where did that come from in your head? What was your unique set of inspirations for that?
Absolutely. So there was two really specific things that I can absolutely trace it to. The first one was that I moved to San Francisco for a job, and I loved San Francisco. It was, growing up in Scotland, I was, very aware of the place because the Beat generation were all from San Francisco. And if you'd asked me when I was 15 what I was going to be doing with my life, by the time I was 25, I was going to be a beat poet living in San Francisco. Yeah, of course, I got to my mid-30s and I'd never even been to San Francisco. So but I moved there for the job, and it was 2016, so it was kind of, the world was kind of had begun that sudden change we've been in of, suddenly there was Uber and all these things, but also just every second person I met in San Francisco was working on some weird startup, which, they were always immensely proud of. And then when you dug into it, they were always doing something horrific. Like, it was always like, oh, I work at, Fade. And you're like, oh, great, cool. What's Fade? And you're like, well, we're a startup for home euthanasia. Really? Is that, so it was kind of this weird sort of like tech dystopia world that I already felt I was living in. And then my day job was, I had a job writing on a film at Pixar, who of course are sort of famous for the emotion of their movies, and it's very much a laboratory of emotion. So I spent a lot of my day kind of thinking about emotion and storytelling in film, and how what moves us and what doesn't. And so kind of, I guess, just putting those two things together, I had to, I'd been hoping to write a novel for years, and I started a lot and none of them had gone anywhere. And then one Saturday afternoon, the concept of an Android screenwriter popped into my head, and I thought, that's it. And it's the first time it's ever happened like that. Normally, when I have an idea, there's this huge period of like, oh, that's a bad idea, I'm not going to, but this one I felt pretty straight away. I was like, I'm going to write that,
Yeah, that is so interesting to hear. Now we're sprinting towards the end of our time together, but something I wanted to ask you before we wound up was, we were talking a bit off camera about the confluence between being a qualified doctor, being a screenwriter, being an author, of which there are many examples. Where do you think that comes from, Simon?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's sort of endlessly fascinating to me. I mean, I think, like, partly I think that actually, in one way, the two jobs weirdly aren't that different, because obviously you need all the science knowledge for medicine, but ultimately it's still basically just communicating with people about their lives, and ultimately it's one human communicating with another. And I think, as writers, that's what we're always looking for, is just that sense of connection and communication. I think there's also sort of like the idea of, if you want to be a writer, then, studying medicine, you just spend so much time close up with people at their most dramatic and emotional moments. And then, of course, as we were talking about, there's this huge history of it. So there's, going back, like, Chekhov was a doctor. Conan Doyle was, Conan Doyle was an interesting one because he basically hated medicine. And I think there's a bit of that I didn't. I always quite liked it, but there's definitely, some writers become writers to escape medicine. But then weirdly, there's this particular crossover with screenwriting. So, I'm Scottish, and I think the two, probably the two biggest names in screenwriters who are doctors is John Hodge, who wrote, Train Spotting and all Shallow Grave, all of those wonderful things. And then another Scottish doctor, John Colley, who wrote Master and Commander. So I'm Scottish. Alas, I'm not called John, so I'm probably not quite in that category. But I'm working hard to get there. And I think there's, with the medicine particularly and the screenwriting, I think they're both very sort of, structured and disciplined in terms of the thinking, that like so much of screenwriting is problem solving, and it's kind of just that, like, I think I use the same sort of, logical diagnosis of, why isn't this working? Oh, the problem's in act one. How do we fix this? And it's pretty similar to the thought process in medicine some of the time.
Mate, I think that is such an illuminating way to answer that question. And it feels very resonant when you say it. I'm sure you're right. And you'd made me think something which hadn't crossed my mind before. I'm a big Conan Doyle fan. And yet when you see his portrayal of Dr. John Watson, you get the sense that Watson will do anything to ditch his practice and leave it and go off on another adventure. He's itching to get out of the door. There's never a, well, Holmes, I've really got to look after these patients. He's there straight away, right? Every time.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and yeah, I think that's probably right, that he probably is a cipher, and it makes sense actually, because of course, you know, as you'll know, of course, you know, the model for Sherlock Holmes was Joseph Bell, was Conan Doyle's professor at Edinburgh, and he was the sort of, you know, he was the guy that could stand at the end of the bed and diagnose the patient because their suntan came down to their shirt sleeves, which meant they'd been in the army in Afghanistan or something like that. So it probably does make sense that, you know, if Sherlock Holmes is Joseph Bell, then it makes perfect sense that Watson, who's kind of bumbling along in his wake, you know, is Conan Doyle, right? And really did dislike medicine.
It makes complete sense. And on that note, this has been Forbidden Planet TV, and I've had the pleasure of chatting with Simon Stephenson about his epic novel, Set My Heart to 5, which you can order in softcover from HarperCollins from the links attached to this video. Simon, thanks so much for joining us today, mate.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it so much. I'm such a fan anyway, and so it's a real delight.
Thank you, very kind. Right back at you, mate. You take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.
Great.
Cheerio. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.